So he's saying that this is a progressive measure, something that Liberal Democrats can live with, because those who have the ability to pay will pay most for the cost of education, whilst also making sure universities in an age of austerity aren't starved of cash. But I have to say, of course, that argument isn't going down well with those we are seeing on the streets, although it's a smaller demonstration than 2 weeks ago, and it isn't going down with some of his own backbenchers who are determined to vote against him. But at this stage, I can't see any compromise that he's willing to reach. For example, a lower cap on fees, or perhaps increasing the £21,000 payback ceiling. I don't see some kind of compromise being talked about. What I see is him saying, look, I'm going to have to do a lot more to explain why we've arrived at this, rather than simply saying to his own backbenchers, I'll meet you halfway, and then go back to the Conservative part of the coalition and suggest that they also change their tune. And I think the more we see of these demonstrations, actually, the more determined he will be to stick to his guns.
But at some point, if these protests continue, which they are, a student telling us earlier that there's another one now planned for November the 30th, are you saying that the government will just sit and try and ride this out?
I think they will try and ride it out because they think they've got a defensible case. What they're arguing is, of course, that no one has to pay tuition fees up front. They only pay back when they graduate. And, of course, after 30 years, their debt is wiped out. That's the argument they're sticking to. It's one they think they can win. But actually, privately, to be perfectly honest, quite a few people in government, especially the Conservative side of the coalition, when you talk about this kind of reaction, are actually relieved that there aren't bigger protests. For example, during the poll tax demonstrations, there are people out on the streets of Windsor and Eton, and at this stage we're also not seeing the kind of protests we're seeing, for example, in Portugal, where there's a general strike, or the kind of mass demonstration we saw on pensions in France. So there may well be more street activity, shall we say, against what the coalition is doing in due course, but not yet.
Ian, sorry to interrupt again. We're just looking at some very tense scenes close to you in Whitehall, just down the road from you. We've seen what appears to be another arrest by a number of police officers. This crowd of protesters, it's hard to tell how many, it seems to be a pocket of the protest, being boxed in by police with a wall to one side, police vans to the other. Earlier we saw protesters trying to escape that area, being pushed back into the crowd of protesters, and now there seems to be more tensions building as the crowd try to break through that cordon of police.
It does look as if the police have got now a concerted movement to push the crowd in front of them. I push the crowd back, and yes, as Chris was saying, our helicopters now sort of changed around. So this wall, for those of you who just joined us, that strip of white, you can't see the contours so well from this angle, but that strip of white is a wall. Some of the students who don't like the direction that they're being pushed in have been trying to make their way over the wall, and officers on the other side have simply been unhooking their arms or legs and pushing them back into the crowd below. But you can see where this line is, and that the movement is now to be pushing them back. You can see a lot of pretty angry hand gestures as the crowds are fighting against that. Mike Sargent is looking at these pictures not far from there indeed, and it's very hard always when you see these scenes to see if things are getting violent, if there are individual cases where people are being singled out, or if this is just a sort of herding motion. Mike, what's your sense?
Well, I think certainly the police are trying to box in